So we've gone over how to run Simulator and what some of these buttons are and the basics of setting up a project. Let's go over the Navigator on the left-hand side of the screen and talk a little bit more about how this middle contextual area works. So just so that we're all on the same page, I've clicked the far left icon on the Navigator and I've clicked the name of the app. And by clicking the name of the app, I've opened up the center contextual screen. So in this contextual screen, it says the display name, signing, a bunch of other things that you can scroll through. And you'll notice that this center screen will change based on what I select on the left-hand side. So whatever I select in the Navigator, that's what's going to show in the center screen. So let's click the Appdelegate.swift. And just for the purposes of this video, I'm going to quickly change my preferences so that it's a little bit easier to see the text. All right, so this is a .swift file, meaning it's a piece of Swift code, and this is run. The Appdelegate is essentially, basically you can think of it as a piece of code that runs whenever certain things are fulfilled for every application. So for example, did the application get entered into the background, meaning did someone hit the home button? Did it close, or did it start, etc. And so the center screen changes based on the different things we have selected. So these are two Swift files. They look pretty much the same. Then we have the main.storyboard, which opens up the interface builder, which is where we'll actually build the interface of our applications. The assets folder, the launch screen.storyboard, which is another type of storyboard. This is basically the loading screen of your application. And the plist, which kind of basically says like what's required to run this application. And just to quickly talk about that assets folder, that's like where your app icon, images, sounds, etc. go. We have this products folder. Within that we should only have our one app, and if we were building a product that had multiple versions of an app, they would all appear under products, as well as sometimes like tests and things like that will appear under there. So you can see how the center screen changes based on what we have selected. And again, we'll go over this stuff a little bit more in depth, in particular these screens and all these rules and settings and things. But I want you to just get the interface down for now, because that can be probably the most confusing part of Xcode in general. So that was the first tab, which is basically the file browser. So what we're actually looking at here is the folder that we looked at the beginning. So what we're really seeing is there's our app project, there's the folder, and within that folder, here's those other folders, and you can see those appearing here. So essentially, this is just a simple folder navigator. We can search at the bottom and filter through things. The next tab is the source control tab, and this tab is going to show us our different versions as we've pushed things to GitHub, or even pushed them locally just with Git. We'll be able to see if we've made any branches. For example, we briefly talked about branches before, but we have just one master branch right now. But let's say I was working on a project where I had a team member who wanted to split off and make their own version. They might have their own branch. Remotes are essentially, is it remotely hosted? And this is being remotely hosted on GitHub, although I have not pushed it yet. So as I click through these things, it'll show me all the different commits that I've had. Remember the commit message that we write? It's the same thing. So I can see my commit message adding my playground file to GitHub. You remember I did that commit message a few days ago. So that's what the source control tab is for, and this is where you can just verify and pull different versions down of your application. The next tab is the symbols navigator, and this lets you see different classes and functions within those classes. So for example, in our view controller class, which if I go back to our file navigator, we have a view controller, and don't worry too much about what the code means now, we'll go over that in a future video, but we have this class here called view controller, and within that we have a function called viewDidLoad. And if I go to that symbols tab, we have the class, that's what C means for view controller. We have an M, which basically means function, but it's standing for method here. We have a method called viewDidLoad. And if I click it, it actually highlights it within that specific file. So the symbol navigator can be a really great way to quickly jump between a bunch of different class files and different methods. So if you have like, let's say, 10 different class files, and within each of those you might have 10 subclasses, and then there's multiple different methods for each of those. This is a really great way to quickly jump around. So this is presented hierarchically, but it can also be presented flatly, which in this case, it's not going to actually show that well, but if we had nested classes, they would appear flat. So then the next tab is simply a search, lets you search in the project. This will show you any errors on this navigator. So build time means whenever we try to build, meaning we run simulator, running simulator is basically building. Whenever we try to build, if we have any errors, they'll appear on this screen and we can search through those and click them and they'll highlight our application, or runtime errors, which we'll get into a little bit more in the future. The next few tabs you're not going to use. This is for tests, which we're not going to have in this class. This one is just debug stuff, which you actually have to run debug sessions in Xcode to do this properly. We're not going to be using that. This one is breakpoints. Breakpoints are basically ways to add stops in your code. So if you only wanted your code to run to a certain line, in fact, I'll just show you here real quick. I could add a breakpoint here and give that breakpoint some information, basically saying I want it to stop running whenever it hits this, and each breakpoint that I add will appear in this breakpoint navigator. I'm just going to quickly delete those breakpoints. And so you can see all of your breakpoints here. Again, not widely used in this class. And this last one basically is almost like a history of everything that you've done. And yeah, that's the simplest way to talk about it. So if I can look at the time, so today at 3 p.m. I ran, this particular build of my application.